And next, I'll be going over one of the more anticipated, I guess, series of the season. One of the bigger, yeah, I would say this is one of the more hyped series of the season, right? I'll be fair in saying that. It is called 16-Bit Sensation Another Layer. So this is originally manga. It was actually a doujinshi, sort of independently produced manga, individually slash independently made manga, um, created or it actually debuted in Comic Kid if I remember correctly. So this is a manga original, originally a doujinshi original, produced by um, Tamiki Wakaki, who you might know as the artist behind The World God Only Knows, Misato Mitsumi, and Amazuyu. And these three, what they had in common is they all actually worked in Aqua Plus. And Aqua Plus is one of the famous, uh, the probably one of the most famous visual studio slash Bishojo game slash eroge studios of all time, right?
Yeah.
They've made Tears to Tiara, they've made To Heart 2, which literally like influences otaku culture to this very day. And what I mean influence, like it is referenced, not only referenced, but like so many things are just inspired by it, right? Utawara Rumono, stuff like that. And actually all of these three, I believe, worked together in Aqua Plus with making To Heart to Tears to Terra and Utaura no Mono.
Yeah.
And I believe they also worked a little bit when over at Manglobe Studios when they were animating before, obviously Manglobe went bankrupt. Um, so they have had a long sort of association together, and this is they made a manga sort of not depicting, but it's like inspired by their times working in the animation industry and making or not in the animation industry, but in making these sorts of Bishoujo games. So, uh, there's a little bit of difference in the series before I go on. So, the original uh, manga was depicted pretty much directly in like the 1990s when again they were kind of working out, the start of the Bishoujo game kind of boom in a sense, and doing this. There's a slight variation in the anime where the protagonist is from 2023, but then they times travel and send her back to 1990s. So it's kind of like their sneaky way, I guess, of doing this like modern remake, not reboot, quote unquote, in a sense, but it's like kind of whatever. It's pretty much the same idea. Um, so going over sort of the staff here, it's done by Silver Studios. It's a very small, lesser known studio. They did a lot of random OVAs and a lot of like key animation help. They are backed by a shit ton of subcontractors, like 15 different subcontractors. So they have a decent amount of money to run this. And a lot of so the general directorial and animation staff is a mix of a decent amount of people who are relatively new to the scene, like they have some like works under their belt, but they're not like super veterans or anything like that. Combined with a decent number of like actual just like longtime veterans. So the director Sakuma Takashi is a relatively new director. Again, this is his like second role after he was the chief director for Roommates, Roommates being the sort of the male version of that like one room or whatever. But other than that, he mainly did storyboard stuff centered around works kind of based in the last, I want to say, 4 or 5 years or so. Um, Similar experience with again the music, Yasukian, as well as the I want to say art director who did Arimoto Hisai, who's done like a lot of background art, but he hasn't done like a lot of like directorial roles, and they are again uh, cited. They are supported by veterans and such as uh, Sasaki Masakatsu, who's doing the character design, as well as veteran Motoyama Satoshi, who's the sound director. So a good mixture of veterans and newcomers. I think it's a little bit interesting that the a lot of the important roles are done by quite new people on this sort of I want to say more bigger project, but these things do happen, and it's important to give newer people these bigger projects as well. But yeah, the voice acting cast pretty um decent, solid lineup. Not like super like all-star studded, but there are a lot of solid seiyuu in here. Plenty of A-listers. Atsushi Abe, Koga Aoi, Kawasumi Ayako. If you don't know who Kawasumi Ayako is, she is the voice behind Saber. Hori Yui, what is it? Yamane Aya, stuff like that. Fukushima Jun, Ito Kentaro, stuff like that. So a lot of A-listers here, alongside some lesser known voice actresses. And especially, I want to give a shout out to Kasumi Ayako because she does she does a sort of more supporting role in this series, but like her voice stands out in the cast, and it's like very noticeable. Um, it's not that she's like trying to voice act and almost be like a diva, but it's very hard to like not notice her acting and voice. So just a shout out to her in this role and capacity. So that's that. Quick talk about the opening theme or opening ending. Both are kind of just like, standard anime song J-pop opening ending kind of stuff. Neither was very impressive, but especially I was kind of disappointed by this opening called Rokko Rokko Go Sango by Shoko Nakagawa. Nakagawa Shoko, obviously the singer behind Sorairo Days, the opening for Gurren Lagann, very famous. Um, but I wasn't sure whether this sort of soft J-pop was the best fit for Nakagawa, or even sort of the best use for her talents, because again, like something like Sorry Eight Days, I think she's best suited to something where you can just belt out, right? Belt out, and have her voice just like be out there. And I feel like that would have been a little bit better than this sort of more like demure, this milder opening. But it is what it is. I wasn't very impressed by either opening or ending, but it's there. Uh, the visuals were pretty innocuous, uh, but I mean, it had Uh, I mean, this had a decent amount of money, and I also think there's not like a lot of frames to this in general because most of it is just like talking, right? And there's not like a lot of animation. There are people like falling over or people kind of like leaning back in chairs or walking around a little bit. But other than that, there are very few like actual animation frames. And even when things are being animated or drawn, right? It's like all stills, right? It's like static pictures of the visual novel eroge or bishojo game character that they're creating inside the anime. So um it's like I don't know. The visuals are innocuous but and clean, but it's not like impressive in any manner. And so, it is what it is. Um so yeah, that's the quick coverage of the audio visuals. And I guess I'll just go over the summary real quick. So if I were to read off the Mal site, Konoha is a female illustrator who loves beautiful girls and Bishojo games. She works at a video game studio and or who that's making like visual novels and stuff like that, and aspires to become a super famous illustrator. However, reality did not work out as well as she has hoped. In the present, where mobile games are all the rage, Konoha spends her days as a sub illustrator, just coloring the back of background characters. And she's kind of working on this like really uh like Yukige crappy, like cheap level game that can sell. I think it was like MILF Hypnosis Salon or something like that. I think that was the game's title. So it's like instead of making like a full like, the classic like visual novel games that we know and love, she's just like, out there just trying to, you know, contribute to some shitty Yukige. And then after some happenings, she uh gets to like this like she kind of stumbles upon the secondhand like game store where everything is like super cheap, and it's like all of these masterpiece games are being sold for cheap, like Conan, the original like Conan version, like Rance, stuff like that is all being sold for like $1 each. and she's like, "What the fuck?" She buys everything. She buys Tokusei, she buys Canon, she buys Rans, she buys all of like the classics, right? To heart. Um, she takes them back home and she opens one of them, and she's suddenly enveloped by dazzling light, and she gets transported to the past. However, this past is in 1992. So this is the start of the creation, sort of the boom of Bishojo games. Games made on, these older computers, and these like, click text, adventure, not adventure, but it's like, these like uh dating sim-ish kind of like visual novels, the prototypes of what we know today, right? And she joins this indie company called Alcohol Soft, and in order to help them make these like visual novels, because and Bishojo games, because she's very into, she this is her passion. She wants to draw and make these Bishojo games because she really, really, really loves Bishojo games. So that's sort of the story, and the flow is the general flow, without spoiling too much, is that she helps out this indie game studio create this game. Uh, there there's like a decent amount of like trivia here and there in the process of creating the shoujo game, right? And in between these sorts of like trivia bits, um, where the trivia is both representative, both the trivia is about both, like the drawing and like programming and like little bits of stuff like that, or like related to the actual specifics of making the visual novel. But it's like there are also like trivia about general kind of cultural phenomena and like flow. Because again, you have to remember the original creators, Wakaki and the others, the Aqua Plus people, had literally been through all of this. They're like literally spilling trivia, like cultural trivia, and like how people felt and like what was going on through these times, like a history book, but represented in this sort of anime trivia. So that's sort of the nature of that, what they're doing. Um, so it's a little bit, it's that mixed with sort of a little bit of the time travel thing, like going back and forth, and kind of how the main girl, the main hero, resolves all of this like time travel nonsense, and a little bit of some drama mixed in, stuff like that. So um every time she managed to leap back and forth in time between the past, like where the alcohol soft is working, and the present. And every time she goes back to the past, she arrives at a different, slightly like more recent like point in time. Like she'll arrive in 92, then she'll arrive in 96, and then she'll arrive in 98 or 99, stuff like that. So then that sort of like, so the time travel is used to show like different evolutions in the timeline of Alcohol Soft, the visual game developer, which is also which also helps show like the trivia about how the time like flowed, right? Like the beginning of, again, the Bishojo game creation on these like old like PC 98 like devices, all the way up to, the inclusion of Windows, right? And how people adapted to that, and how Bishojo games kind of boomed and evolved like during that time. So if you guys, I guess this is a little bit more like an American kind of thing, but if you guys have played like Amazon Trail or something like that, where it's like the way the game was set up was like you would travel down the river, and the more you travel down the river, the more like you go through like these different moments in history. Like you, every time like you landed at some place and you saw a historical event, it was like a different point in time. So it's kind of like the anime is kind of made like that, where it's like every time the hero goes back, it's like a different point in time of how Bishojo games and that culture evolved in Japan. And it's a very interesting way to do things. And so I
Wait, I
guess
have
I
a
guess I
few
should just
questions.
yeah, yeah, go on.
So she works for Alcohol Soft?
Um,
How would you say she
yes,
like
so
so how? And how do they not know
so
she's a
she
time
when she
traveler?
because the setting is that they just don't believe her. Like she's just like, "Oh, I traveled from
Wait,
time.
so she
I'm from the
works there,
future."
but she
And
just
they're
disappears for 2 years to them?
so it's like so what happens is like she comes in and like works and helps make them make like the game. Like in 1992 they're making a game and they're at like, they're developing it and they're kind of smoothing it up and they're working on it, right? So she helps them for that period of time, like up to when they finish making the game, right? And then after she finished making the game, she like accidentally opens up, her bag or whatever, and she gets warped back to the present. And then when she's like, "What the fuck? Like, why am I in the present again?" And she like wanders around or does works at her present company and does whatever other shit. And later on, she gets time leaped by opening up another game. And so then she goes back to the past, but it's like not 92, it's 96. It's a few years after. So then you see the evolution of Alcohol Soft. So it's like all of these other people that she met at Alcohol Soft, um, that were making, their game in like a small house, but now they're at like a slightly bigger like office or whatever, right? So it's like she goes back and then now she's in 96. She's met all of her friends who have become 4 years older and they're still making another game now. So she helps him in that game. And then they all, make the game and struggle and celebrate and blah blah. And then she ends up disappearing again. And then, this kind of repeats back and forth for a couple of times. Um, so
I had another question,
uh yeah,
and that fuck, and now I don't remember it. It has something to do
yeah.
with the time travel again, though.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Where it was like,
I'll get into a little bit yeah.
no, yeah, I just I'll have to let it come to me again.
Yeah, I'll get into more of my thoughts in the time travel in a bit, but it's starting sort of a little bit from the top. I want to kind of talk about the references and like trivia a little bit more. Um, I do really, really, really like the trivia part, and it's like they have a lot of it. Obviously, it's just like out the wazoo. It almost rivals, I want to say, like Nyaruko-san in terms of like references, where it's like,
Okay, I
or like
mean,
the world God only
I don't
knows.
believe you.
Um, yeah. Where it's like they talk about, for instance, like even at the very beginning, right? At the present, like modern day company that she works in, I mean, obviously, Alcohol Soft itself is riff on like Aqua Plus, right? But it's like,
Yeah.
Oh,
um,
now I remember my question. When she's working for
yeah,
Alcohol Soft, does she just like make no money because of
yeah,
inflation?
she's supposed to be unpaid. She's supposed to be unpaid. But then she gets food and like from like the food that they make at the office or whatever.
Damn.
It's like or she
That's
uses sleeping bag.
illegal.
Not
Yeah.
in the
But yeah,
90s,
it's a
baby.
lot of that, a lot of like how she's paid, how she survived, like back when she gets time leaped and stuff like that is very handy. Um,
Okay.
and that part is like not seen as very important in the continuation of the story. And again, I'll get to that in a bit and how I feel about it. But so the trivia itself, for instance, like at the very beginning when she's like working at that company and she's just like a sub illustrator and she's just all she's doing is drawing background art. The the initial setting, and the president of the office coming in or the manager coming in and talking to them is like they're like, "Oh, we're no longer doing full price games because it's like too expensive and like nobody will buy it, and instead going to do discount games. We're going to sell this, 4,500 yen, um, Nukige, the MILF hypnosis salon or whatever it's called, right? Because it's cheaper and it'll sell." And
I like
that
how
like
for
the
Nukigaze, like
moment,
the cheap game is still like 45 fucking dollars, by the way.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, 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 exactly. Um, And that really just like hit so hard, like for me, because we've especially like obviously everybody here by now knows this, but especially for me, like I've seen this as well, right? Like, like we've seen all these like big games, like like Kohime Muso or Kanon or whatever being made, and now what are we seeing? We're seeing but we're seeing all these Nuka games being made because they're cheaper. We're seeing instead of full games, we're seeing essentially fan disc versions, right? Like small, like one route versions of the full previously full size games being made over and over again because they're like the cheaper versions, and that's like all the studios want to run with. Um, keep afloat. And even in localization, right? Like from years ago, and manga gamers was especially infamous for just announcing this, right? They were just like, no, we don't want to translate something like Koime Muso because it takes too long and we don't make as much money from it. So we're just gonna translate Nukige because all we have to do is we just have to translate, all these moans, and we're just going to make money for all profit from it because it doesn't take nearly as much effort compared to how fast we can just shit it out, right? uh like stuff like that, the references to like all the visual novels, again, it has like references to like Palette, with the Mashiro Yori Symphony stuff. It has references to Basason, all the Ubisoft like series, Kanon, Rans, Dokuse, like all the stuff. um the painting techniques from, they mention like literally all like the development, like how people painted on mouse like before then, and like how people did like the copying of the line art and stuff like that, the evolution to Windows, away from PC 98, and um as well as sort of how people got used to pen tablets and Photoshop for the first time, and then adding on more layers and expanding the stuff, and doing console stuff, and the contact with America and like international like corporations, stuff like that. Like they explain this story just the way and like it shows it. It's almost like it kind of gave me shivers because it has like this almost historical documentary vibes that can literally only be told at this level of detail and this sort of convincingly by the people who are there because the original creators were there, right? So I think that trivia part was so cool, and it was just so, again, it was so convincing. And I think that sort of trivia, um and the way it was told, and the way, not, it wasn't just like, again, it wasn't just otaku trivia, right? Like, oh, you, back in my day, you had to draw line art like this exactly, or whatever it is, right? It wasn't just that. It was like the trivia about the cultural mood, right, at different timelines, when, back when Bishojo games were just like quirky weird stuff, all the way up to when Bishojo games were becoming much more and more and more of a craze, and studios were becoming bigger and creating these big Bishojo games, right? Alongside, scaling technology. Like that sort of cultural mood is being described in this trivia. And I think that was, I think the way that sort of trivia is being described in the series is almost unparalleled, compared to any other previous series. Um, whether it's Shirobako, or whether it's New Game, whether it's any other, something like, even just something like nerdly nerd like Upote, or like anything that's like specifically like uh trivia related. I think this does a very good job of going toe to toe with them or just blowing them out of the water. It is very good, and obviously you can tell the experience, the stories that Tanaka Akaki and the other two Aquaplus people wanted to tell through this um, through this series. So that's like the trivia part is like unparalleled. I'm not gonna hold anything against it. And again, it almost reminds me again of Amazon Trail, of all one of those like older 1990s 2000s games, but in anime form, where it's like they show the different parts of the history. It's almost like a museum, but it like in anime. So the changes were told very straight, and that was pretty great. So that was the good part of it. The parts that are not the trivia. So it's like the character interactions, the time travel bits, the sort of overarching like thematics of the story. Like, oh, we just want to, we're creating these games to further the imaginations of people. We just do this because for the love of the game, stuff like that. Uh, that stuff is extremely minimal, and quite disappointing. And the issue is it's one thing to have it kind of just be like be have those character interactions, stuff like that be pretty vanilla in order to help the trivia flow along. Oh, again, something like Upute, right? Or any other like girls in a club kind of series. Although, a lot of the girls in the club kind of series do have their decent character development as well. But the character development and like the the way that the time travel concept is handled outside of it being like a blatant billboard like, "Oh, by the way, guys, we're just using time travel to just show you guys how Bishojo game development history was made." Like other than like whacking the viewer over the head with that sort of message, I think the character development and time travel was done very minimally. And because you can see how minimal that is, there's too much contrast with the actual like quality trivia parts of the story. And once there's too much contrast, and I think I mentioned this in for one or two other series, once there's that sort of contrast, that sort of glue falls apart. So it's like this sort of character development, the cast, the time travel is supposed to be the glue that holds together the trivia of the story to make it not seem like a pure documentary, right? But the moment that the character development becomes that sort of ragtag, that sort of like just like bare bones, it just kind of feels like, oh, okay, like why did you even just make this story? You might as well just have made like a general sort of uh mockumentary, right? Like a dramatized kind of like dramatization of a documentary almost. Like I don't know why you had to make this like anime girl if you're not gonna do anything really with this anime girl. And like there's a small part of it later on in the series where it's like there's a drama buildup, um, and there's this sort of like managerial cultural conflict that goes on with like the shifting that deals with like the transition of time and how developing studios kind of grew up with the advent of technology and how people kind of accept different like shoujo games and stuff like that. And the drama in that sort of mini arc ish is okay, but it's the exception to the rule that it's the exception that proves the rule because everything else is pretty much just like very bunk. The way that the characters treat the time travel, the way that the characters treat each other outside of again the drama with like the manager and the management and like the culture stuff like that. Um, some of the other future like time travel stuff and like there's like an alternate timeline stuff that goes on later on. All of that stuff, the thematics that surround it, like you just gotta humans just gotta rely on boosting their imagination or whatever shit like that. All of that is just not good. It's just not done well. And not only is it not done well, it's just done very minimally. And it's just very disappointing because I kind of felt like this is sort of how it ended up with the world God only knows at the very end too, where it's like at the beginning it had a good idea, but then later on when the world God only knows went into this goddesses arc, and then it kind of got involved with like world changing powers almost, and like all these like supernatural things were coming in one by one. I felt like all these like supernatural battles and stuff like that were coming in one by one. I felt like the end of the world God only knows was just very very like haphazard, and just like the Tamaki just had no idea what to do with like the characters and stuff like that, and it was just not um coherent. And I don't think the creators really learned that much, um judging by the story of 16-bit sensation, and that's a little bit disappointing to me. I don't expect to have the best, most creative characters while you're also telling like a dramatized kind of like documentary style anime on the evolution of the Bishojo game development throughout history. But it's like I expect there to be some sort of foundation. I don't expect the girl to just be like, oh, I got thrown into another time. Oh, let's make game, and then just like spill some trivia, and then oh fuck, I gotta go back to the present. Like just add something to the character, right? It's just like it was very disappointing to see the protagonist be very, 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 very like not even one dimensional, but like half dimensional. It was so like she is so vanilla and nondescript that it's just like very hard to like s- get any value out of like the character developments in this story. It was very disappointing. Um, and I feel like if I don't know, like what the author should have done, cause it's like if they want to make an anime like this, I feel like they had to go two ways. They had to make again something that was a lot more like a general like documentary, dramatized documentary kind of thing with more realistic kind of like setups, or just like even just something like literally just straight based off their work at Aquaplus, but just like riffing off of it. Or I think they should have maybe they should have done a little bit more like focus on the main character, but then kind of treat it like a variant of like the main character goes on a journey kind of thing. But instead of going on a journey to like her walking around and seeing like different things, the journey kind of just becomes, every time she does a time leap, she kind of focuses on again the cultural mood of the time. And I think that's like going into that, leaning on that trivia, leaning on that sort of like cultural depiction. I think that would have been a lot more valuable than the kind of feeble attempts at character development that happened on in this series. But it is a little bit unfortunate that this happened. Um, Yeah, it had really good trivia. It just had superb trivia, but it was just dragged down so much by the um, very mediocre character development and development of the story outside of the trivia bits. So very unfortunate, I would say. Uh, Dark, did you remember your question about the time skip
No,
thing?
yeah, it was just about it was literally about like if she's working for this company and getting paid, like wouldn't like
Yeah, yeah,
wouldn't
yeah. It
inflation
was
make
just
that
about the
useless?
realism. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It was just like again, like the realism part. Like
Hey man,
that's
when you
part of
introduce
this
time
thing too, where it's
travel,
just
I
like
want to
yeah,
know if you've got all
yeah,
your fucking eggs counted or whatever.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just like that part is hand waved, and it's part of this again general attitude. Again, as I mentioned about the author just being like, yeah, the girl time travels and she gets to see the shoujo game is being made. But again, the problem is too much of it's being handled. Like even the characters' personalities are being hand waved, and it's just you can't do that. You have to have a minimum foundation of the original story, and then on top of that, you can stack as much trivia as you want. Go fucking Herman Melville on this thing. Go, Alexander Dumas. Tell the entire fucking French history, like economic history. Who cares? Like, but but you have to have characters on the bottom of it, right? Like those guys, or you um, uh, just I don't know, man. It was like when
So what you're
like
saying is
Herman
this
Melville
series
or
should have
like
been more like what was it? That Beatles movie where that guy stole all the Beatles songs because he went to a world without the
yeah,
Beatles. And she should have just remade
yeah,
all those games
yeah.
and
It's like
faster.
at least with uh I guess this is like an unfair comparison of sorts. But when authors, literary greats such as like Herman Melville or Victor Hugo or whoever made like Moby Dick or like Me or whatever, and they included that like entire part in the front where it's like huge like swaths of text about like whale hunting or like economic conditions or whatever, right? At least afterwards, the original story still had characters that were like engaging. Like you can't leave people out to dry on the original story like that. So again, very unfortunate. That was sort of all I really had to say about the story. There's not much to it. I think again, the trivia uh, unparalleled almost, but it was dragged down too much. It was dragged down too much by the original story. Overall, I will give this a. I just keep wanting to give this series a higher score because I'm so like I love the references inside it so much, and I love this series, this sort of theme so much, and it's a rare occasion that we can have such experienced people talk about this sort of industry and this sort of cultural history and stuff like that. But I think I would have to give it a. I would have to give it a 6.5. I think the visuals are okay. The audio is the OST and the OPD is kind of whatever. And the trivia really carried to the top of the mountain, but it's just I can't give it more than like 6.5 or even 7 point. I think even giving it 7 points is too much. Probably 6 or 6.5 points because I can't justify having the original story being that like ragged and bare bones. I just can't. So, yeah. Uh, but if you do want to kind of check out again Tanakawaki and all the other former Aquaplus staff members, kind of thoughts and how they kind of visualize the history of like Bishojo games evolving. Um, and again, they were some of the main actors in that movement. They were part of the Aquaplus during their Chohar days, the Tears to Tiara days, the Utawara Mono days. They were some of the big hitters. So if you want to get a taste of what they felt during those sorts of cultural moments, I guess please do check this out. So that was my review on 16-Bit Sensation, Another Layer. Again, this is by Silver Studios. The original being a manga. I believe it got multiple volumes, but the original was a doujinshi that was sold at Comcast. Um, so you guys can maybe try checking that out as well. It's probably available like on Melon Books or something like that. So you can probably check it out there.